to Pixel Gaiden! Hello and welcome to another episode of the Pixel Gaiden YouTube channel. My name is Cody, one of the three hosts of Pixel Gaiden, your home for everything retro video game and retro-inspired video game stuff. In episode 61, we just came out with of the audio podcast that was released on June 30th, 2021. We did a bunch of fun things. We had another awesome game show with the guys. We went ahead and talked about 6 good TI-99-4A games. That's a Texas Instruments microcomputer with some pretty archaic games. We found some gems in there, some really good stuff, some new stuff, some old stuff. But in this excerpt, which I wanted to put here on YouTube with some video elements to it, I pulled out my Cody's Corner segment in which I talk about the games that really endeared me to fall in love with the little brown beige bread box, the Commodore 64, which some of you guys, if you listen to the show, you might know I did not know what the Commodore 64 was until the year 2014. So I was over 30 before I really found out what that machine was all about, what that system did. And I wanted to let you guys kind of follow me along on the journey of how I learned about it, and more importantly, give you a quick overview of some of the games that really just made me fall in love with this machine. So, back in 2014, I was already into collecting retro video games, kind of been into old games my whole life, and was really big into importing games at that particular period. And I had just imported a large lot of Sega Saturn games, and some of the games I did not care for as much I was selling off on eBay. One such game is a fighting game called Groove on Fight, and I was selling that game because I do not care for fighting games. I just did not have a lot of love for them. And some guy on eBay bought it from me and asked if we could meet in person here in Elk Grove, which was kind of sketchy, but it turns out that person was my now show co-host, Eric Nelson. And it was interesting. We met at a Starbucks. We exchanged the game, of course, and we ended up talking for like an hour in that Starbucks about all kinds of things. Really started to become friends right then. And one of the things he had told me about was the Commodore 64. Now, the Commodore 64, I had heard of that term before. I did not know exactly what it was. I knew it wasn't a console. I knew it was some kind of computer or something, but I really had no idea. Now, keep in mind, in 2014, I'm 31, 30, something like that. And the truth is, the most of my experience with the system was from looking at pictures inside of Retro Gamer magazine. Now, Retro Gamer magazine is, of course, based out of the UK, where microcomputers were much more prevalent. The Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum, I now know, being two of the biggest ones, along with Amiga later on. And I was, subscribing and buying these magazines, loving all the stuff I was familiar with, and having to flip past all these pages of these crazy brown colors of the Commodore 64 and the bright, garish neon colors from the ZX Spectrum, not knowing really what they were, and really just kind of seeing Retro Gamer magazine as half full of stuff I had no interest in. But now this guy's here in front of me talking about it. And then he tells me about another thing he was really nerding out on at the moment, and that was a program on his phone called Tap Dance, which he was telling me you could load video game ROM images, if you will, onto your Commodore through the phone app by plugging it in with an 1/8" jack and downloading the game that way, basically replacing the data cassette that you would normally use to load games on back then, particularly in England, but also to a lesser extent here in the US. And that was another mind-blowing thing to me. I had no idea that audio files could be played and turned into a program. So now the seed has been planted, and the Commodore 64 is kind of on the edge of my mind. And I would say roughly a year later, I finally, Eric and I had texted back and forth sparsely, and I finally made the plunge and said, whatever, I'm going to buy one of these things on eBay. I see they're starting to go up. Let me just grab one. And I got lucky with a nice example of a bread bin Commodore 64. If you're watching the video, you can see it here. And I got a couple of really cool accessories with it. first of all, the future was 8-bit device shown here, the SD2IEC, which allows me to load files using an SD card. And to this day, this is what I still use, and I love it. And then also this item here, which I've talked about previously on the show, it is called the 64JPX, and it allows me to use not only your standard controllers, but now I can plug in the Nintendo controller and a couple other control. I think Super Nintendo. This one also does Genesis. Anyways, and it does a couple things. It allows you to map a button, one of the buttons, to up, so up can be jump, and then it also allows the protection from things like the Genesis controller that can allow shorts in the Commodore and blowed stuff up. So at this point, I had plugged these things in and was trying to fight my way through working with the Commodore 64. Up to this point, I've only watched Eric's videos he had on YouTube. He only did a couple, but he did a video on Raid on Bungling Bay, and also one of his favorite games, I think his favorite Commodore 64 game, Paradroid. And I was instantly in shock, if you will, fighting with this thing for, I think, at least a full night, if not 2 nights, trying to get things to load correctly, not understanding how the computer worked, why it wasn't just a video game where you plug it in and it goes, not understanding a computer that didn't have a GUI interface like the Macintosh I had grown up on. I had never been a DOS gamer. I had never worked with command prompts or understood how things load. Everything was kind of spoon-fed to me by the more modern technologies, if you will. So learning this was a whole different thing. I remember trying to, of course, start with some of the hardest games, multi-load games, which were very difficult because I did not understand, again, the file structure. And then I also was trying to load games like Mayhem in Monsterland, which basically fills up the entire memory. So the fact that I was using a program to load a file browsing system, that was eating into the memory. So when I would load Mayhem in Monsterland over that, there wasn't enough ones and zeros left to fit the whole game in, and it would just crash every time. I also learned the difference between PAL and NTSC games. I knew there's a difference, but I never thought about it when I was trying to load games and they would kind of run, that those might be PAL games. So lots of things, lots of learning curve here with me on this. When I finally did get the system up and running, the first game I had loaded up was one I'd heard a lot about, and that was Impossible Mission. And thank goodness that was one of the ones I started with, because I instantly fell in love with the system right with this game. I remember creating maps to try to figure out what rooms had what in it. I was trying to, complete the game and all, but I wanted to go to the easy rooms first and try to get as far as I could before I tried the harder rooms. Found out, of course, that the rooms are kind of procedurally generated and they're not always in the same place, so my map had to be remade every time. I did notice that the game was quite kind of jerky and kind of, I want to say the movement was kind of stunted compared to 8-bit stuff that I had played in the past, NES and Macintosh. And that was true of a lot of the original games I started with. So moving on from there, I ended up playing Paradroid, which is, of course, a great little game here about a robot that's kind of infiltrating this spaceship on different levels, and you have to kind of fight harder and harder robots. It's kind of half action shooting game, top down, and then these cool little puzzle elements in between. Eric did a whole video on it, so I knew kind of what to expect, but to this day, it hasn't clicked with me completely, and I can't really load it right up and just enjoy it. I kind of have to read the instructions every time and try to get into it. And from there, I tried Bruce Lee, which is, again, another one of these top 10 games that when I go on the internet and search out what games I should try, these pop up instantly. And Bruce Lee was kind of cool, but it also kind of let me notice that games on the Commodore, and now I know a lot of microcomputers, were kind of unrefined. It's a great, fun game. I did enjoy playing it, but kind of like some of the things I'm used to on, Japanese-made NES games where hit detection's solid, there's one way to do things. In these games, you can kind of hang on to a pixel and kind of glitch your way through things, or some of the things you're meant to do don't look obvious, but not once you get a feel for what where hit detection is and how things land. You kind of fudge your way across it, and that's kind of how the game was made to be played. It's interesting. So I had fun with it. Again, didn't fall instantly in love with this one, but it's a solid game. And then I heard great things in the Retro Gaming Magazine about a series called Monty, and I had tried a game called Monty on the Run, which has an amazing, very recognizable soundtrack from Ron Hubbard. And I did love the soundtrack, but instantly knew that these games are so pixel perfect, and now I know there's a lot of these on the Commodore, specifically British games or European-based games, that I cannot handle the picture perfect stuff. I also tried The Last Ninja, which was well known, and I don't think that one holds up very well nowadays. Kind of this action adventure game, isometric, which drives me nuts. With kind of like you have to collect all these things and use them in different places while fighting other ninjas haphazardly in these punch battles. And then I finally did, with Eric's help, get Mayhem and Monsterland connected and working. And it always still felt a little weird on my Commodore because I had not realized that I was running a PAL version. So it was always kind of glitchy. And even though the colors were happy and bright, more like an NES, they still felt muddy. To a point on how I can explain that they're both happy and bright and muddy, but the gameplay was more to my comfort zone and enjoyed playing bits of that game. So when did I know the Commodore was awesome and I loved it and I wanted to keep doing the Commodore moving forward? Well, it was when I found out people were still making zounds of games, if I could use that word. And I found these kind of, you'd hate to call them homebrew because they're really not homebrew, but these commercial releases that have been coming out since, well, the 2000s. But it started with one game in particular. I mentioned on the show many times, a game that to this day is my favorite Commodore 64 game, released by Cytronic, and that is Guns and Ghosts. Man, this game is cool. It is like a two guys, I guess it can be played 2-player or 1-player action game where you are jumping around these platforms and you're blowing up these zombies, which have to be hit twice. When they die, they kind of fall to the ground and come back alive again, have to fall to the ground again. If I remember right, there was either 80 or 100 total screens you had to clear. Super cool. You got power-ups as you went, so it's kind of like an RPG in that element where you would gain more rounds in your shotgun. I always chose the shotgun guy. The other guy has this like laser zappy weapon, which I know Eric prefers, but to me this game is dead on with the shotgun, which you don't actually see the blast or the bullet go across the screen, but it basically goes completely across the screen vertically. And I love how to reload you have to stop and stand still. So the game, is a lot of jumping into the action, shooting some guys, kind of hopping out of the way, hoping you can reload in time. Do you wait for the whole gun to reload, or do you do it partial to try to take care of anything that might be near you? Every 10 levels there's a boss fight. Love the boss fights. Just a brilliant game. Absolutely love it. And to me it's a must play. My favorite Commodore 64 game. Soon after that, I'm like, wow, these guys make some great games. What else does this company Cytronic put out? Well, they put out a game called Night and Grail, which is another game I fell in love with, and I played this one all the way through. And it is a really cool Metroidvania. Once again, this is a flick screen game because the Commodore doesn't naturally do scrolling very well. Now, some games further down the list here, people have learned more and more tricks, and they're able to make it work. But this is a really cool game. It's a Metroidvania. You're going back and forth, getting different abilities that allow you to enter different parts of the level. I love the music. I love the way it looks. I love the vibe and the ambiance. The controls felt just right. Unlike a lot of the older games where they felt kind of jerky and chunky, this just felt good. And it's a game I fell in love with shortly after. Eric had then mentioned a game he had just played. I don't think he likes it as much as I do, but this might be my second favorite game on the Commodore, and that is Trance Sector. Now, this game has that, at this point, it's kind of become cliche modern Commodore 64 music, where it's got this like this club beat, like you're shopping at a clothing store in the mall or something. But this is such a cool little top-down action arcade game where you're simply this little triangle, and all you have to do is collect all of the flashing orb things here in the middle of the screen. Clear all those, and you can clear the screen. At the same time, there are these items that kind of scroll left and right, or top to bottom on the side, and if you cross their path, they'll shoot across at you. So you're always aware that these things, when you cross their path, will shoot across at you, so you kind of figure out where you are, where you want to be in conjunction with where they are and where they're heading. And then on top of that, you've got this floating ball that is changing shape or letters on it, and you can collect all the letters to spell the full word, and you get an extra life. Absolutely love this game. I can play it a ton. Works well with joystick or D-pad, which not all games for me work well with the joystick. Now, as I was playing more and more games, I kind of learned from Eric a few more tricks that made me nuts. He defined it well when he tried to explain to me that the Commodore 64 was really the Wild West of computers back then. I think all the computers were back then, but specifically this one, because it was so well known to him and the United States here. So I had to learn, for example, that Control Port 1 and Control Port 2, depending on the game, your system's going to use a different port. So a lot of times I would open a game and I couldn't get it controlling. Well, I was always in port 1, because why wouldn't you? That's what all my consoles did. But of course, on the Commodore, in general, you want to leave your controller in port 2. More games use it. And sometimes you just have to pull it out and put it in the other port and make it work. That came apparent when I started playing some of these older games, like the one that Eric recommended that he mentioned on the show a couple of times. And Space Taxi was probably one, or to this day is probably one of the few original classic Commodore games that to this day I have to play regularly, and if I turn on the system I usually give it a go. It is a very cool gravity-based game, kind of like, Lunar Lander kind of a thing, but much more to do. You have your little space taxi. There's this really cool voice that says, "Hey, taxi," in different pitches, and you have to go to that particular landing pad and pick that person up and then deliver them to the pad they want to be delivered to. And you have to repeat that enough times until the gate above opens, and you can fly up past there to go to another stage where it'll look different and it'll happen again. You can also run out of fuel, in which case you want to make sure that while you are delivering people to their pads, if you run low, you can go run and grab the fuel can and fill back up. And what's cool about this is there's multiple difficulty levels, easy, medium, hard, and I want to say there's another one. But each one, if you start on easy, you can complete all 7 or so levels, beat the game on easy, and then you go to medium and hard, but they're completely different levels. So it's really like having 3 different versions of the game in one. I've beat easy, I've not beat medium, but it is a blast to try every time. Really fun game, highly recommended. Probably my favorite classic game. However, there are other classic games that I've grown to love. After seeing this one in Retro Gamer magazine, I had to give Buggy Boy a try. And this is just a super simple, fun arcade. You can call it a racer, but you're not really. I guess you're racing. You're racing, and you're trying to collect points, avoid rocks and stuff in the middle of the road, collecting flags that give you points based on their color. There's not a whole lot to say about it. It's super simple, stupid fun, and Buggy Boy is a great game I have absolutely grown to love. And then, as we've talked about on these shows, we've done reviews for every single game in some of these competitions, these programming competitions they've had. So a lot of these simple games that I have grown to love have come from these competitions, but there's 3 I want to talk about right up front that are among my favorites. One here is Paper Plane, which is a really simple game where you're a paper plane and your only buttons are left and right on the joystick, and they kind of change your angle of the plane, and all you can do is go left and right, try to avoid things while going down through this endless chute here, and trying to see how many how much distance you can go down before you hit something. That's the whole game. This thing is a blast to have out when you have people over, and everyone can just give it a shot when they feel like it, trying to get high scores. We did a game night where we had this. We We for my birthday party a few years ago, but then also we set it up, I think, when we did a local video game store retro game corner. They're in one of their LAN party things or whatever you wanted to call it. And then a game called C64 Anabalt, which is a simple one-button game where you're this dude running. Music is super cool, and you simply hit jump and try not to fall down between the buildings. I mean, it's simple, it's pretty. Another great game for those kind of party scenarios. P.O. Snake is a game where when you press the button down, your snake is going to start heading to the left. If you don't press the button down, it goes to the right. And that's the whole game. You're trying to move your snake around this thing without running into yourself or any of the walls. And you are trying to complete level by level, and they get harder and harder. Simple, stupid fun, once again. And then the last one I want to bring up, Dice Gator. Man, this game is unique and interesting and cool, and that's where the Commodore scene right now, I think, excels, is people making these really creative, fun, simple games, which later often become full-fledged releases, which I think P.O. Snake did. I think Cytronic did pick that one up. But Dice Gator is really a really cool game here where you're just controlling this dice and trying to get all of these dots filled in. You kind of have to feel it to understand how cool the game really is. If you just watch it, it seems kind of lame, but it has a cool feel to it. More modern games that have just basically continued my love for the Commodore 64, and there's tons more than this, but how can you go anywhere in the last year in the Commodore 64 world without talking about Felix Jr. This game is the best version of a Fix-It Felix Jr. type clone game, if you want to call it that, based off of the movie game, of course. There was one made for the Genesis. There's a couple arcade ones made. This is the best game. This is the best Fix-It Felix. It is super solid. Gameplay is super addictive. Tight controls. The difficulty curve is perfect. Sounds great. Feels great. Quick loading times. I don't know what else to say except you have to get this game for your Commodore. Of course, it is free because it is a licensed game and they cannot make money off of it, so go grab that. Now, Galencia is a for-profit game. It came with the 64, not C64, but the 64 that was released in the last few years here, both the mini and the full version. And for good reason. It is an amazing Galaga type game. Much better about Galaga, in my opinion. We did an episode a few months back on Galaga clones, and this one came near the top. Actually, I think it won once you averaged everything together. And if you can see it here, it's just a super cool, fun twist on Galaga that makes it more interesting, more to do, feels better, more fair than Galaga. I shouldn't say too much, or Doug will yell at me. Shout out to 10 Minute Omega Retrocast for hating on my Galaga hate. Moving forward here, hey, Text Adventures are not dead. I did an interview with Stephen Vogt, if I'm saying that right, about a year ago on the show when he had just come out with Hibernated 1. Now, this game has since been released on like 20 different platforms. He's a porting fool, but really good text adventure about being in space. What I love about it is he took the LucasArts mentality where you can't die. You can't put yourself in a pickle where you can't proceed. No matter what, you're heading in the right direction. So if something happens, for the most part, you're heading in the right direction. Had a great time sitting there, drawing my own maps, writing down items, taking care of a business until I was able to get off the spaceship. So super cool game. Another highly recommended item here. The last two I want to talk about before I go are Zeta Wing, a game we talk about again a lot on the show here. Sarah Jane Avery made this game and has recently released another game, another shooter called Soul Force. However, this is the game that really stuck with me. She only asked a few bucks for it, so go ahead and download it from Sarah Jane Avery. I think Protovision is the one that is now selling Soul Force, but this one I believe was off of itch.io. And it is just a super solid, impressive NES quality, like good NES quality, vertical scrolling shooter that has very fair patterns. The more you play it, the further you'll get. Really well executed shooter. And last but not least, I want to talk about my love for anything Cthulhu and Cthulhu Mythos. You don't have to know what that is, but it's a game here called Shadow over Hawksmill, and it's a neat slight action, slight puzzle, slight Metroidvania to a point, but basically you're going back and forth and trying to find items in all these different screens, and you're trying to figure out what's going on this crazy town. These dark cultists are up to no good, and you're trying to figure out how to stop the terrible things that are being released from this cult's rituals. Very atmospheric, very unique, and it was based off of another game that was released prior on the Commodore 64, which I have not played yet, called The Legend of Atlantis. So there are some games that basically have not only made me fall in love with the Commodore 64, but more importantly, the current scene that's going on, and has made me stick along with it. And there are a ton of other ones in here I would love to give mention to. Age of Heroes, Isle of the Cursed Prophet, all kinds of games by Protovision, double-sided games, Cytronic, and other companies as they release more and more. So I just want to say thank you to all of the programmers out there doing these things for little to no money, and to those who enjoy the games, please pay them. Don't, it's easy to copy these games, but go ahead and make sure they get paid. If you are able to, I suggest buying some of the physical stuff. It's really cool to have these on the shelf. Some of them come with fun little trinkets and posters and things like that. So if you haven't yet jumped onto the Commodore 64, which I know a lot of our listeners, specifically the American ones, have no idea what I'm talking about, if you're my age or younger. But it is a fun platform, even if you emulate it or however you want to do it. I highly suggest you dig into this. It is by far the most happening scene for any retro console or system that I know of. So that's it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you were able to find some games maybe you haven't heard of before, or maybe it brought up some memories of things, how the way you got started by using your Commodore 64. If you didn't know what a Commodore 64 was, maybe you learned something today. Maybe this will endear you to the system as well and get you on your way to start playing with that. My cohort Tim on episode 60 did a whole segment, kind of basically an overview of how to get into the Commodore 64 in multiple ways that you can experience it through emulation of real hardware, fake hardware, new hardware, old hardware, all kinds of different things. So definitely give episode 60 a chance. And if you guys could go ahead and take a look at the links you see on the screen now, you can find our podcast all over the place, anywhere podcasts are found, your iTunes and your Stitcher and whatever else is out there. So check out those episodes 60 and 61. We got some great stuff coming up here as well on episode 62, which will be released on July 15th. I know we're going to be talking about a number of very cool things, including a great list of 6 good games for the original Game Boy, which should be fun. Please also know that we're part of a larger network of podcasts called the Amigos Retro Video Game Network. So please check those guys out as well. They have a Everything Amigos podcast. There's a Our Sinclair podcast talking about the ZX Spectrum microcomputer, and our boy Rob Flack O'Hara, of course, is on there with his show Sprite Castle, in which he covers a different Commodore 64 game every month or so. So check those out. The other hosts of the show, Eric and Tim, will be posting stuff on this YouTube channel as well. So please do all that fun stuff, liking and subscribing and clicking and joining and interacting. And we hope to see you guys on the next episode.